discover more about the nature of reality and help create a better life for yourself and the rest of the planet. My name is Nicke Palmer, and I've created a process called Draw Your Reality. For more information, you can go to my website, nickepalmer.com, and receive a free gift that I put together just for you.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm very good. Nice to be talking to Turkey for the first time.
Well, thank you. It's also great having you on our show. David, you predicted lots of things in the past, and they all happened, actually. Well, I will start again. I'm sorry for that.
Okay.
Yeah. David, you predicted a lot of things before they happened, like microchipping, Bitcoin, elite pedophile scandals, Iraqi weapons of mass destruction hoax, and migrant crisis, and so on. And most probably, or at least I think, you're going to make some predictions right here as well. I don't know. But I'd like to talk to you about the hidden facts about the global elite who is ruling the world, and their agenda, what they are aiming to do. And because when you look at history, you see big changes happened in the recent decades, and now I believe that we are in a transition process in the whole planet in terms of technology, science, and politics, and so on. So what do you think about the agenda of this global ruling elite?
Well, what you've said all kind of connects, because how could I have predicted so many things over the years in my books and interviews? Have I sat in this room and pulled it out of the ether? No, it's hard journalistic research. And the reason that you can predict many things that are to come, many of them in detail, not just theme, is because there is an agenda for the world. There is a global hidden hand operating from the shadows that plays out through the things that we see, like governments and politicians and military and media. And if that agenda for the world is not challenged and is not stopped, then it will play out. And therefore, if you can research and uncover, as I have in the last 30 years, what that agenda is, then it's quite simple predicting the future, in the sense of, if that agenda does not get stopped, challenged, exposed, then it will happen. So the reason I've been able to predict so many things that have turned out to be true, many of them fantastic at the time, is because I uncovered what the agenda was. And I'm just saying, this is what the agenda has planned, and it happens. Now, I don't say that with any joy, with any satisfaction, because the whole point of what I do is to alert enough people to the fact this agenda is real, so that there is an intervention and it stops playing out as the future. And it's very simple in its basic form. You have a network of people, which to a large extent come down to an ancient bloodline, but basically there's a web, and at the center of the web is a spider that's spinning the agenda through the web. The spider is deep in the shadows, and then the strands immediately around the spider in the web, they're your most exclusive, most secretive of secret societies, many of which don't even have names. You then come further out in the web from the spider, and then you start meeting all the secret societies that we do know about, well, we've heard of, but don't know, of course, because of their secrecy, what they're doing day by day. I'm talking about the inner core of the Freemasons. I'm talking about the Knights Templar, the Knights of Malta, Opus Dei, the inner core of the Jesuit order, the Skull and Bones Society in the United States, and so many others. And then as you come out from the spider through those secret societies, you meet what I call the cusp. These are organizations that sit at that point between the hidden, which is what I've described up to this point, and the seen. These are organizations that gather together politicians and military people and intelligence people and corporate people and banking people and media people from all over the world, and they gather and form a common consensus policy among them, which when they go back to their countries plays out in all the different countries. And these organizations, these cusp organizations, are like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations in America, that's driven to such a large extent American foreign policy since it was formed in 1921, talking about the Trilateral Commission, again came out of America, created by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. And also there's one that was created in the 1960s called the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome, its role in this cusp network, if you like, is to exploit the environment to justify global transformation of human society. This is where the whole, or one of the areas from which the whole climate change hoax came from, which is being used to justify transformations of human society that wouldn't otherwise happen. And then you
you also believe the climate change is also a hoax, right?
Yeah, and then you come through these cusp organizations in the web, and now you're into governments that we see, government agencies that we see, banking operations, corporations, Silicon Valley corporations, etc. And at that point, it seems that all the decisions that are driving and changing and directing human society are coming from those organizations that we see. But actually, ultimately, it's coming from the spider in the hidden through this structure that I'm talking about. And the basic goal is, again, very simple. When there's a few of you, and compared with the global population of 7.5 billion, it's a very few that are actually doing this in full knowledge of what they're doing. When there's a few of you and you want to control the vast many, then you have to centralize decision making. You know, the more points of decision making there are, the more diversity of it, the less control any central cabal is going to have, because there's just too many points to keep control of. You can't do it. So what we've seen systematically over literally thousands of years, because this is not a modern phenomenon, it's more extreme in the way it's playing out now because they're getting closer and closer to their goal. But it's been playing out for thousands of years. So we started out in human society as organizing ourselves in tribes, where a few people in the tribe were deciding what happened to the tribe. Then lots of tribes came together and groups came together into what we call nations. And now a few people at the center of the nation are dictating to all the former tribes. What we've seen happening now in the European Union, and it's planned to play out across the world, is that all those nations now are being gathered together under centralized control, actually of a handful of faceless non-elected bureaucrats, and they're dictating to all the former countries, which are all the former tribes. So you can see this process of centralization, global centralization. And we gave a name to it a long time ago, globalization. That name is just describing this agenda that I'm talking about. And so more and more power has been centralized. And with every step that you centralize power, you have more power at the center to centralize even more and even quicker. And so this speed of centralization has gone on and on and on. And now we're looking at a situation where a ridiculously few people, compared with the 7.5 billion humans, are actually directing, increasingly controlling, and transforming human society in the way that they want it to be.
Yes. So, as far as I understand from your words, you say the basic goal is the centralization of all the powers. I mean, like the monetary system, a centralized monetary system, a centralized political system, and all other kinds of this stuff, and also a centralized bringing ultimately the absolute slavery. Is that right?
Well, the structure, I would say the structure that we're going towards, but actually we're already in it. It's just a case of how more extreme it becomes. The structure they want in this uh, centralized global dictatorship is to, first of all, have a world government which would dictate to every community in the world. Now, if you look at the European Union, you're looking at a kind of example of what I mean by world government. I'm not even talking about people being elected who then, as a global gathering, make decisions about the world. Look at the European Union. That's not how it works. There is a so-called elected parliament in the European Union for one reason and one reason only, so that the bureaucrats can say it's a democratic organization. Oh no, we've got a parliament. Well, a parliament with no power. The the um, the drive that introduces policy in the European Union comes from the bureaucrats, and then it's rubber stamped overwhelmingly by the so-called elected members of the European Parliament. It's a joke. It's only there for propaganda purposes. So if you look at the world government that they want, it would be basically the same. The government would really be bureaucrats dictating to everyone in every community, no matter what their religion, background, color, creed, everybody. And under that structure, under the control of that world government, they want a world central bank that would dictate all global finance, and the European Central Bank is a stepping stone to that. They want a world army to impose the will of the world government on anyone that wants to resist it and not accept what it tells them. And that is overwhelmingly based, and it's unfolding all the time, on NATO and the United States military. The United States military spends more on its military every year than the next 7, 8, 9 countries combined, including China and Russia. Because it's not really the American military, it's the military of this cabal called the American military, which is evolving itself into the world army with the rest of the NATO structure. I wrote in books in the 1990s and said, watch for NATO operating outside of the North Atlantic region, which it was supposed to have been created to defend during the Cold War. Watch for it operating outside of that as it expands its global reach. And now, of course, it's been operating in all over the place, all over in the Middle East, not least in places like Afghanistan. It was part of the bombing of Libya and so on. And so the world army, and this, by the way, another thing I said in my books in the 1990s is that they're planning a European army, a European Union army, which would be part of this global structure eventually. And now, of course, in the last few weeks, we've had people like Macron and Merkel in France and Germany saying, oh, we've just had this idea. We should have a European army. I was writing about that it was the plan in the 1990s. This is, the idea they've just had the idea is a joke. And then they want a world currency to be administered by the World Central Bank. And as I've been saying, again since the 1990s in the books, the world currency is designed to be purely electronic. No cash, no different currencies, just eventually a cashless world digital currency. And look how fast, in certainly in the Western world, that cash is disappearing. It's disappearing so fast. And finally, and this is the real end game in this list, they want a a human race who are connected, have their minds, their brains, their body brains connected to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence becomes the human mind and feeds and dictates what we think, what we feel, what our perceptions are, and thus from them what our behavior is, etc. And that is being played out, of course, through Silicon Valley. And I say through Silicon Valley because it's not coming from Silicon Valley. The idea that people like these tech billionaires in Silicon Valley, like Zuckerberg at Facebook and Brin and Page at Google, etc., Bezos, not actually in Silicon Valley, it's out of Seattle, but Amazon is part of this whole network. The idea that they are running those companies and ultimately own them and run them and control them is ridiculous. The Silicon Valley giants are a front for the Pentagon and the intelligence networks. This is why, if they didn't exist, these organizations, then the Pentagon and the intelligence networks would have to invent them. I say they did, because look at what they are giving them. First of all, they are giving them 24/7 surveillance of the population, in which they don't even have to go searching for private material on the population. The population is posting it for them on these sites. You're having, secondly, the ability, not least through using algorithms, to dictate the information that people see and don't see. Look at all the censorship that's going on with Facebook and Twitter and all these other organizations. Look at how the search engine lists are being systematically manipulated on Google and other search engines, so that the ones you see when you put in a certain number of words are the ones they want you to see overwhelmingly. And so it's giving them control of surveillance, it's giving them control of increasingly of what people see and hear. And thirdly, a lot of people don't realize this, organizations like Facebook and Google and Amazon are actually at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence technology and development. So they are the ones that are creating this global grid of technology known as the smart grid, which is based on what's now being rolled out without testing, called 5G. They're the ones that are largely on the cutting edge of that. And so Silicon Valley, I call it the devil's playground because that's what it is, but let no one think that the corporations and the front people for those corporations are the ones that are actually calling the shots, because ultimately they are not. And so look at this from a global centralization of power point of view. You have Facebook, Google, and Amazon, these organizations, being used by everybody in the world. They are a central point which everyone in the world uses, virtually.
Even my mother is using Facebook.
Yeah, so whoever controls that central point that everyone's interacting with is going to have enormous centralization of power, not least, as I say, as we're seeing more and more with the most outrageous, blatant censorship, is what people see and hear. And the reason or one of the reasons that they're pushing all this, all information more and more that people see and hear onto the internet is because once it's digitalized like that, then algorithms come into play. So instead of even having to have people watching what's being posted and saying, oh, we've got to delete that and delete that, algorithm codes are doing it because they're logging into or locking into specific words, specific subjects, specific phrases, and if they hear them, delete. So this is the world we're looking at. And people globally need to put down the irrelevant labels that they call themselves, whether it's Jewish, Muslim, atheist, Christian, whatever, Hindu, and put down their sense of race a minute and start to realize that if we allow these things to divide and rule us, which is what has happened throughout known human history, then this small cabal is going to divide and rule people into this global centralization dictatorship. And it's not coming sometime over the rainbow, it's unfolding in front of our eyes. And we need to stop fighting among ourselves and realize that we're all in this together, and then we might have a chance, because while we're divided and ruled, the rulers will be this cabal.
Yeah, as you can remember, before 1991, there were two superpowers in the world. One was the US and the other one was the Soviet Union. And the global financial elite, or the ruling elite, was giving a threat concept in front of the whole the people of the whole planet. And that threat concept was called, the so-called, was the Soviets. And after the collapse of the communism, and a period of time just passed, and then we experienced the 9/11 attacks, and then the Clash of Civilization thesis of Samuel Huntington became a reality, and the new so-called threat to the world was Islam, And then we are, I feel like we are standing at the corner of a transition process right now as well. Now the technology is destroying the borders in terms of politics or human society and all other kind of things as well. So in this kind of globalized world, it seems like this ruling elite requires a new so-called threat concept, maybe from outer space, because the world is like a little village by internet and technology. So, do you agree with that idea? I mean, they need a new concept of threat.
Well, look through history and you see recurring techniques of mass manipulation. And one of them is to unite people behind you who wouldn't all otherwise be behind you by inventing an external enemy. I can frankly give you no better example currently than Israel. I feel sorry for Jewish people in so many ways, because they are brought up to believe systematically, in my view, and in the view of many Jewish people who've experienced it, to believe that the rest of the world hates them. And therefore, the cabal that runs Israel, like there's a cabal that runs every other country, says you must look to us, the cabal, to protect you from all these people who hate you. And therefore, people will look the other way at things the cabal does, often that are horrific, because, well, we need the cabal to protect us. And you see this process everywhere. So, of course, as you mentioned, the Cold War, then the West has to be frightened of the East and the Soviet Union. People in the Soviet Union have to be frightened of the West because of the two different propagandas that these two different groups of people were constantly bombarded with. So what do you have? A massive divide and rule. You look at the population of the East during the Cold War and the population of the West, and if we sat in a cafe or a bar or sat around in a park, we'd get on great. Oh, hello, what culture do you have? Oh, well, that's interesting. We do it like this. We'd get on great. But this cabal doesn't want unity. It doesn't want harmony, because that doesn't work. You try to manipulate a harmonious situation, it's much more difficult than a disharmonious situation where you've got elements to play off against each other and create your target group or population fighting among itself. You've already won then. And so all over you see this. So you're quite right that when what happened with the Soviet Union, and I wrote about this before it happened, by the way, is that this agenda going towards a centralization of a global structure had at some point to start encompassing the Soviet Union into its lair. And while that Cold War was beneficial to it for a long time, not least massive build-ups of weapons that wouldn't have been justified otherwise, there comes a point where that division is going to stop the global absorption of countries. So what I said was that the breakup of the Soviet Union was done systematically because what they wanted to do once that happened was to start to absorb countries of the former Soviet Union into NATO, World Army, and into the European Union. And that's exactly what has happened. So they had to ditch that enemy, the Soviet Union. They're trying to rekindle it now with this ludicrous demonization of Russia. But you're right, what they went for next was the enemy is Islam. Now, I don't follow any religion, and I completely respect those who do, as long as they don't try to impose it on everyone else. That's when I get interested. And so if people want to follow Islam, well, good luck to them. If people want to follow Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism, good luck to them, as long as they don't impose it on anyone else. But the idea was to demonize Islam, certainly elements of it, to create this four-letter word that runs the world, the four-letter word on which the Soviet Union Cold War was based, and that is fear. You get people in fear about anything, they will look to people to protect them from what they've manipulated to fear. That's what's happening in Israel with the population. That's what's happening all over the world. And so they're creating things to fear all the time. And what has happened is that there has been a very clear process by which Islam and countries of the Middle East have been demonized to justify invasion and regime change. Now, if you go back to the 1990s, an organization was created in America dominated by followers of Zionism, believers in Zionism, ultra-Zionists, I call them, really extreme ones. And it was called the Project for the New American Century. It was created by two ultra-Zionists called Robert Kagan and William Crystal, who want to bomb country after country and send young men and women out to bomb country after country, and they've never seen a bullet fired in anger themselves. If a car backfired in Washington, they'd be under a bed 20 seconds later, calling for their mum. But they want everyone else to go and fight and be killed, kill and be killed, because of their agenda. Anyway, they start this Project for the New American Century. People were in it like Dick Cheney, who soon was to be the Vice President of the United States. In fact, the de facto president under, can't tie his shoelaces, boy George Bush. In there was Donald Rumsfeld, who would be the 9/11 Defense Secretary. In there was John Bolton, who again has never seen a country he didn't want to bomb. The psychopath he is, John Bolton. Just been to Turkey, hasn't he? As now Trump's national security advisor. In there was Paul Wolfowitz, the ultra-Zionist 9/11 Deputy Defense Secretary. Also there, Dov Zakheim, the ultra-Zionist comptroller of the Pentagon at the time of 9/11, and so it goes on. And they produced a document in September 2000 calling for regime change in a series of countries, for America to fight, quote, multi-theater wars to bring about this regime change. And what were the countries they listed in September 2000? Iraq, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, North Korea, China. And then many of these people came to power a few months after that document was published in the Bush administration in January 2001. And one of the things that this document said is that this plan, this process of regime change in the Middle East that they wanted to instigate. Oh God, excuse me. I was just thinking of William. I was just thinking of William Crystal. So anyway, they publish this document and they say that they are going to have this happen very slowly, unless, to quote the document, there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor to justify a massive build-up of and spending of the American military to respond to the new Pearl Harbor. Well, 9 months after this crowd came to power with Bush in January 2001, and 1 year to the month after that document was published, America had what George Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century, 9/11. And because of that, they have justified going into Afghanistan, into Iraq, into Libya, into Syria. They're now demonizing Iran, because that's another one on the list. They're trying to demonize North Korea. China, of course, it's ongoing. They're demonizing Russia as well. And what they've done is to use 9/11 as a trigger to start the sequence of events, which led to the invasion of Iraq on a lie of weapons of mass destruction, which they knew weren't there. They then fund, arm, train, and support rebels in Syria to start the Syrian civil war. Earlier than that, they did the same in Libya to remove Gaddafi, which ultimately was done from the air by NATO. And so what you've got is a very clear pattern of what this document by this Project for the New American Century in September 2000 demanded actually unfolding ever since. And the thing to point out is that, of course, immediately 9/11 happened, you had a Republican in the White House, Boy George Bush, and you had a Labour Party Prime Minister in Britain called Tony Blair. And they lied to invade Iraq. But when they were picking off others on that list, it wasn't Bush and Blair anymore. When they went into Libya, it was Obama, who's supposed to be a Democrat, opposing Bush. And it was a guy called David Cameron in Britain, who was supposed to be opposing the Labour Party of Tony Blair. And then Trump comes in, who in his election campaign says, we've got to stop basically interfering in the affairs of other countries militarily. And he drops the Iran deal, which had calmed everything down in that area, and started to kick off the demonization and the major sanctions against Iran to start that bubbling back up. So the point I'm making is that it doesn't matter what the political shade of the president is, or the prime minister, or the party in government, because this hidden hand is in control, whichever of them is in power. And so the same agenda has unfolded since September 2000, no matter which party has been in government. And this is because there is a global agenda. And look at politicians. They come and they go. Then another set come and they go. What's running the show is what I call the permanent government, that which is always there. that which controls government policy, government administration, controls the banking system, controls the corporations, controls the corporate media.
Yeah, the politicians changing all the time, but the pattern remains the same.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think the next big events, I mean, the next 9/11 can be, or when it might happen? What do you think about it?
Well, it's a matter of what is necessary. You see, if humanity just accedes to this ongoing agenda of ever more centralization of power and giving their power away and allowing their freedoms to be deleted, then there will be no need to make it happen, because it will be happening, and and it will just unfold unchallenged. It's when it's not happening quick enough from their point of view, or what they want is not happening, that's when they create these what I call problem reaction solution scenarios like 9/11, where you create a problem, you get a public reaction of fear, of anxiety, of do something, and then those who've created the problem and got that reaction then openly offer the solutions to the problems they have themselves covertly created. Problem reaction solution, I call it. Other people call it false flag. And look at classics, where they're still trying to get away with it. And interestingly, because over the years, some of us have been bashing out this this whole technique of create the problem and then offer the solution, it's getting more difficult for them to get more and more people to buy it. I mean, a classic example, when Russia came into Syria, that threw a massive spanner in their works, because let's be honest, if Russia had not intervened in Syria to help Assad as that ISIS horde was making its way across Syria, then ISIS would now be running Syria, and Assad would be gone. He would have gone the way of Colonel Gaddafi. That was the idea. But because Russia came in and actually started to try to push back ISIS, which the Americans weren't doing, they were just going through the motions because they didn't want to stop them, the situation arose where Assad was able to stay in power. And even in the dying days, up to this point anyway, the dying days of their efforts to unseat him, they were still quite blatantly manufacturing chemical weapons attacks in Syria that they were blaming on Assad to justify military action against Assad. And what I found interesting and very comforting, encouraging, is with each time they tried it, the less public momentum behind it they got. And of course there was the one where Trump hadn't been in power very long and unleashed missiles on Syria on the basis of an obvious false flag problem reaction solution, a so-called chemical attack. So if things had been going well in Syria and they'd been on the way to getting Assad out, there wouldn't have been any need for a problem reaction solution chemical attack scenario, because it was happening as they wanted it. Because it wasn't, then they did it. And it's the same in the totality of the world. 9/11 happened for many, many reasons, but one of them was, and I said it not long before it happened, the time scale of change and transformation that they want wasn't happening. It was too slow. And if you look back at 9/11, what happened since has dramatically increased the speed. It's increased the speed, for instance, of deleting basic human freedoms and privacy. and 24/7 surveillance. Oh, we've got to stop the terrorists. And what's happening, therefore, is you create a problem and you offer the solution. But only if you need to create a problem. And if people go on sleepwalking into this and not challenging it, then it will just happen. If they don't, then they will need to respond and try to set up events to convince and manipulate people to accept what they're at that time not accepting. And so we'll see which way it goes. But what we have to do, surely, is not to accept what's going on, and to realise that we are heading for a globally a nightmare global society if we go on allowing this cabal to push us to where it wants to take us.
Yeah, maybe the next big event is likely to the world will have a traumatic economic crisis collapse, because Milton Friedman says if you want to change the system, the economic system in a country, so you have to make them experience traumatic shock. Then the people will ask you to change it voluntarily.
That's exactly right.
Yes. In the beginning of your speech, you mentioned a bloodline. I want you to clarify that bloodline a little bit more. What is the origin of this bloodline they are claiming?
Okay, I'll come to that, but I just want to just pick up on that point you just made. There is a very, I mean, I've been writing about this for years, since 2008 and the economic crash then, that they plan a much bigger one in the future, because
centralized one.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to transform globally the global financial and banking system in your new image, then, like everything else, you have to destroy the status quo. While the status quo is there, what you want to replace it is not going to replace it. So you need to destroy the status quo. This is what is happening all the time. This is what happens in wars. Wars are, we have them, so many of them, throughout known human history, not because people want them, but because this cabal knows that the quickest and most permanent way that you can transform a society is by a war, whether it's global or national or whatever. And what they do, I call it creative destruction. They have a war which destroys the status quo before the war. They now have another war which destroys the new status quo. And with each new status quo, you're moving closer and closer and faster and faster towards the goal that you want. If you look at the world and how it was structured, and the lines of borders and countries before World War One, and then you look after World War One, then you look before World War Two, and you look after World War Two, then the transformation and centralization that happened as a result of those wars. So an economic transformation into this like centralized system I'm talking about, and the cashless society, etc., then you need to destroy the status quo. And so, I say that on the cards is a very big economic upheaval, which they will instigate. In terms of the bloodline, this started coming into my research quite early. I mean, mid 1990s. First of all, that there was a interbreeding bloodline, and this is not a racial thing. This bloodline has been interbred into all races. First of all, that there was a bloodline, and this bloodline in the ancient world related to royalty. People say, royalty, royal bloodlines, aristocratic bloodlines. Okay, so what does that mean? What does it mean? What do they mean by royal and aristocratic bloodlines? They mean their bloodline is different to the rest, the general population. And so why? And as I traveled around the world and I started studying ancient accounts from different cultures around the world, there was, the Bible even includes it, and the Old Testament. There was an interbreeding between the gods, as they were perceived, and humans, creating a hybrid bloodline. And they became known as demigods, part human, part gods, however you perceive the gods, non-human. And for instance, in China, the emperors of China used to claim the right to be emperor because of their genetic descendants from the serpent gods. This is a common theme. This is why they claim their bloodline is different. And these interbreeding bloodlines, you can chart them out of the, I mean, they were seeded all over the world, but you can chart one group, very significant to today, out of the Middle East, out of Babylon and Egypt, up through the Caucasus and up through the other side. They became the bloodlines of Rome, for instance, and then up into Northern Europe, where they became the European royalty and aristocracy. And they dictated as genetic inheritors of power. There then came a time when the population had woken up enough to say, we're not having this. I mean, crazily, we still have a head of state in Britain through her bloodline, Queen of England. It's a joke. But anyway, you had this resistance start to rule by genetic bloodline. And these bloodlines then went into the professions, which are today the dark suit professions, as I call them. They went into politics, into banking, into corporation ownership, etc., etc. And although they're not overtly perceived as royal, they are a special bloodline in their own minds, and they interbreed with each other, just as you get royal families and aristocratic families interbreeding with each other. So you get what for instance, they call the Eastern Establishment families of the United States interbreeding with each other, because they're trying to hold a particular genetic pattern, which I explain in detail in the books what that is and why. And this bloodline network, which is not a race in human terms, it's infiltrated all races or most races, but it's a race of a hybrid bloodline.
Extraterrestrial beings?
Yeah, well, extraterrestrial in what were the gods, yes. Because, if you look around the world, all these ancient cultures, and they're basically describing the same things, the same interbreeding of a non-human race with humans to create these demigods, this hybrid race. And of course, why wouldn't they think they were gods? We have this high technology now. If we turned up, the high technology people turned up in the ancient world with their high technology and showed what they could do with it, how would the ancients have perceived the technicians of today? They would have said they were gods because they could do things that appeared miraculous. So this is the concept. And so, yes, they are part human, part not human. And this, in the end, is what that spider is at the center of the web. It's this non-human force. And what I found very interesting as I've read these ancient accounts is what common themes they have in describing the way that these gods operate, the way that how they are, if you like, in terms of their mentality, how they behave, and the fact that they operate overwhelmingly outside, though they can come in, outside the frequency band of human sight. See, the reason a lot of people don't realize how these things are possible is because the nature of reality itself is kept from them. The people watching this now, me sitting here, when I look into the space I'm sitting in, I'm not seeing everything that exists in that space. I'm only seeing a tiny band of frequency, which scientists call visible light, which is absolutely tiny. And everything that's in that space outside of that band of frequency, I can't see. I'm not aware of it. And basically, the entirety of infinity beyond what we see is in that space we can't see. So this is where they operate. And for instance, when people say they saw this entity appear out of nowhere in front of them and then disappear into nowhere, or they saw a UFO that came out of nowhere and then disappeared into nowhere, people who don't realize that we're only seeing a narrow band of frequency, they say, that's crazy, that's mad, he must be ill. But what's happened is very simple to explain. Something has entered the frequency band that we can see, and thus suddenly it appears to come out of nowhere. And when it leaves the frequency band that we can see, it seems to disappear into nowhere. But it hasn't appeared and disappeared. It's just entered what we can see and left what we can see. The observer, the perceiver, has the experience of something appearing and disappearing, but it's not literally happened. And so when I, for instance, read the texts of the Gnostic belief system, like the texts found at Nag Hammadi, 75, 80 miles from Luxor in Egypt, found in 1945 in a sealed jar. They are describing about a fifth of those writings, which were supposedly put in that jar maybe around 400 AD. And the information they contain goes back further. About a fifth of those writings describe something called the archons. And the archons, when you then compare how they describe them with what the Islamic world calls the jinn, they are very, very similar, ridiculously similar, even very close to the same wording in here and there. And so wherever you go, you have this concept of beings operating in the hidden, the human hidden, manipulating the human world. And the more
Yeah,
that
there were also documents found in Qumran area near the Dead Sea Scrolls. You must have heard about it. And there was the Book of Enoch, and this writing about all the very same things. But I wonder if you personally believe that the war between these two races, I mean the human race and the anti-humanist race, or with your verse, the spider in the middle of the spider web, is it going to be going to achieve its goal or not in the future? What do you personally believe?
Well, that depends on how we respond. If this force was so powerful that it could just take over, would have taken over. But it isn't. It has to manipulate humanity to accept the takeover, while not knowing about it, of course, but to accept it. And this takeover is being done in stages. I mean, centralization of power, so fewer and fewer people are dictating to everyone else, is part of it. But it's also about manipulating people's belief systems, to give them belief systems, where, for instance, they can perceive, this might upset some people, well, it'll have to, I can only speak my own truth, where they think that everything they need to know is between the covers of a single book. It's not. I mean, let's put it this way. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum in its entirety is about 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Visible light, which is all that we can see, everything you can see is within visible light, is a fraction of the 0.005%. And we're being asked to believe by many, many religions that all we need to know is within the covers of a book, within a smear, a fraction of 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Now, for me, I think that I'd rather think there's more to know than that. But if you can concentrate people's minds on a belief system, this is how it is, and make it as narrow as possible, and then you can get someone else to do the same with a slightly different belief system, and someone else to do the same with a slightly different one, but all vehemently hold that belief system and believe that's the only truth, then first of all, you're isolating their sense of the possible and their perceptions, because anything outside of that perception, that's blasphemy. And you're also creating groups of belief systems that then can be played off against each other, which is exactly what happens. And until we start to realize that these labels we give ourselves, whether they are religious labels, racial labels, cultural labels, are just labels, they're just experiences for a very short period of time, or what we call a human life. And actually what we are, the I, is
David, I'm
consciousness.
sorry for interrupting you, but I need to say something. Right now, my computer says the signal, the connection, Wi-Fi signal is weak, so I can not hear you well, and your also screen, your vision is frozen now.
Okay.
And could you give a few minutes to me? Dondu şu an bu. Onda mı? So I can. So the connection is very weak. This is what my computer says, and so I cannot receive your vision and voice very well right now. But do you have your connection or fine?
Mine's
is it
fine.
Okay?
Yeah. I'm fine this end. Yep.
Benim bağlantım iyi diyor. Burada sıkıntı olmasın abi. Biz full diyor da bana sonra nereden geliyor? Kesinlikle.
I am, by the way, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can hear you now. This one is better.
Listen,
much better. I changed the connection.
I've been.
Okay.
I'm recording my end, not your end. I'm recording my end, this end. I can send you.
Oh, great!
I can send you.
Perfect.
I can
this
send you
is
the
very
stuff.
Good.
I can send you the stuff that was lost.
Oh yes, if you send me your end, it will be perfect.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Very good news.
Yeah,
I'm very happy to hear this.
No, I do that.
Okay, so we can continue. Yeah. You can continue your verse. Yeah. Did you finish your answer, or you want to add something to that question?
You asked me. No, I was talking about religion. Okay. So.
Okay.
If you look at belief systems and what we call religious belief systems, it's not just what people perceive as religion. I mean, for me, mainstream science is a religion, because if you look at the dictionary definition of religion, it's basically to believe in something without question. It's unquestioned belief. And if you look at mainstream science, it's based on unquestioned belief. Look at the scientists that have been inspired or have come across things that have taken the understanding of reality and the world forward. Invariably, when they first came out with them, because they were challenging the status quo, the religion of science, they were lambasted, they were abused, they were dismissed, they were laughed at, they were defunded. This is what happens. The religion, whatever it is, becomes a solidified perception that will resist all challenge. And what we're having imposed upon us now, not least through the censorship of Silicon Valley and the censorship of other media, is a narrative about the world which refuses to be challenged. And, you know, what happens to any belief system? Let's just take a breath here. We are sitting within a smear, visible light, of 0.005% of the universe. If you take what science perceives to be the size of the universe, then planet Earth is the equivalent of a billionth of a pinhead. And we are being asked to accept that there is one version of how things are which we must conform to. It's insane. So why are they doing that? Because that version is what suits them. And if we are going to become mature, awake human beings, then we need to realize that we know next to nothing. And once we accept that, then we'll be more open to possibility that we know it all will resist. And so we must speak our truth, no matter what it is, and not be intimidated and silenced into acquiescence to this official narrative, whatever it may be. There's an official narrative in Turkey that people basically are expected to conform to. There's one in Britain, there's one in America. And if you don't, then there's, in some way, there's trouble. And we have to resist that. We have to stop being told what to think and being told what we can and cannot say, and just do it, just say it. And if enough people do that, then we'll see where the power is. How can one man, one woman, or a handful of people control an entire nation? How can they do that? Should be impossible, because there's so many they're controlling compared with how few of them there are. But it happens all the time, it happens every day. Why? Because the people give their power away to the few and are manipulated to fear the consequences of not doing that. And this is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed more and more and more, where there's more and more reasons why you can't say this or you can't say that. We've reached the point now in the West, it's got absolutely insane, where you cannot have an opinion about virtually anything that's different to the official narrative unless you want abuse, or you want to lose your job, to be vilified. We're looking at a gathering global tyranny. And it will happen, it will reach its goal, unless we decide en masse, or in enough numbers anyway, to say we're not having it, we're not doing it, we're not conforming. And then, if people just had the courage to do that, then they would realize where the real power is, and it's not with the few.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Is there anything else you want to add to your words? It was my last question, by the way.
Well, I would just finish by saying this, it's about perception. Everything's about perception. How we perceive things are dictates how we respond to them. If we perceive things in a certain way, we'll respond that way and react that way. If we perceive them in a different way, we'll do something differently. So everything comes down to perception. And the whole global conspiracy of human enslavement is about enslaving perception. That's what it's about. So there are two ways of looking at life, two endless ways of looking at life. There are two prime ways of looking at life in the example I'm going to give. One, you can believe that you are somehow either a cosmic accident of birth, it just happened by some chemical process randomly, or you can believe that who you are is the body you are and the labels you give to the body, your race, your religion, your culture, your income bracket, whatever. And you can self-identify with that. This is who I am. And that allows your perception to be solidified, because your perception is limited to the labels you give yourself. Other people are doing the same, but giving themselves slightly different labels. And then you can play these labels, perception system, off against these labels, perception system, and so on. And you divide and rule the population. The population is at war with itself. It's in conflict with itself. And the same hands with the strings connected to all the different, quote, sides are manipulating all of them. Or you can self-identify not with the labels, but with the fact that we are a state of awareness, a point of attention within an infinite state of awareness. The same state of awareness that everyone else is, but have a different point of attention within. And then you go from division, these labels are different from those labels, and you realize that in the end, we're all points of attention within the same infinite state of awareness. And the labels and the divisions are illusions. They're not who we are, they're simply experiences we're having. And there's nothing wrong with that. People have an experience as a Muslim or a Christian or an atheist or an Hindu or a Jew. It's an experience. But once we so self-identify with those experiences that we perceive them to be the I, the self-identity, then we get into trouble. Instead, we can see ourselves as different points of attention in the same infinite state of awareness, the state of awareness that leaves the body when the body cycle is over, what we call death, another illusion. And we can chill out. And we can say, okay, I'm going to have this experience as a Jew. I'm going to have this experience as a Muslim. I'm going to have this experience as a Christian. This experience as an atheist or a Hindu. But while we're having these experiences, we realize we're all the same I, just having different experiences. And then we can celebrate the diversity of people's experiences and respect each other to have that right without imposing on anyone else. And we can all get on fine. Jews can be Jews, Muslims can be Muslims, Hindus can be Hindus, Christians can be Christians, atheists can be atheists. But we're not fighting with each other. We just realize they're different experiences, different perceptions in the moment of who we are. But we know the real who we are is consciousness, of which we're all an expression. Now, from that point of view, you are taking down the fault lines that divide us. Doesn't mean everyone has to be the same. Boring that would be, but you're taking down the fault lines of conflict by realizing that when all is said and done, when all the labels are finished with, we are all points of attention in the same state of infinite awareness. And if we could do that while having a human experience, we could still have a human experience, but we could get on and we wouldn't seek. I mean, look at Israel and Palestine. How many people who call themselves Israelis and people that call themselves Palestinians, if left to their own devices, would get on fine, live together in harmony and peace, like they did,
just like it was in the past,
like they did before the ultra-Zionists came in. What is dividing them? You have a few on both sides, in my view, particularly in the ultra-Zionist far right that control Israel currently, that are driving and have self-interest in that division. And so everyone's divided against each other because a few want that division. We need to stop being told what to do by these self-appointed leaders and start to independently come together with each other. And if they want to fight, let them fight. Put them in a room, lock the door, let them get on with it. And let us get on with getting on together, which we all could very easily. That's the world that I would like to see. And I will go on expressing that for as long as I'm here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. It was great talking to you, really.
Been a real pleasure. Yeah, it's
Okay.
been very interesting. Thank you.